Hi everyone, welcome to my channel. Today we're going to be taking a look at a wireless Nintendo 64 controller option for Nintendo Switch and PC, and that's the Brawler64 wireless gamepad from Retro Fighters. And real quick, if you're new here, make sure to subscribe so you can stay up to date on everything happening with the channel. And with that out of the way, let's take a look. So the Nintendo Switch Online Plus expansion pack is finally here, and even though I have plenty to say about the service itself, I'm really just going to be focusing on the specifics of this controller. And I've reviewed some of Retro Fighters controllers in the past. If you're not familiar with them, they're definitely making a name for themselves with some really cool retro-themed controller options, both for the original retro consoles or for modern consoles like the Switch with this option here. So if you've been following the channel for a while, you may have remembered that I reviewed basically this controller, the Brawler64, but that was the Nintendo 64 version, and they just released this updated Switch and PC version here. So we'll be taking a look at the differences and giving my overall thoughts. Obviously, as far as the overall feel of the controller goes, really nothing has changed here, but there are a few things to note as far as functionality and price and all that good stuff. So let's take a quick look at the back of the box here. So you can see this is a 2.4 gigahertz wireless controller, compatible with PC, Mac, and Switch, wireless range over 30 feet, dual Z digital triggers, and a responsive analog stick. So here's the controller itself, and you can see it's themed to look just like the original, but obviously with a much more modernized layout. This controller abandons the three-prong design for a more traditional setup here. And take a look at the back. There's your dual Z triggers, L and R, your USB-C port for charging. And yeah, overall, this is a really, really comfortable controller. I really like the body design of the Brawler64. It perfectly marries the old school retro look with a modern feel, and yeah, I think that's great. And then with this version, instead of getting the Nintendo 64 dongle, you get this USB dongle here for use with the Switch dock. So this controller will only work with the Switch when in docked mode, because you need to use this dongle here. And it's super simple to set up. You simply plug this into one of the USB ports on the dock. This little LED indicator light will start blinking, and then you just press and hold the start button and it syncs up. Super simple. Now, before the Nintendo Switch Online expansion pack was released, I wasn't quite sure how this controller would work, since the Switch detects it as just a regular Pro controller. And I was a little worried that maybe the Switch would detect the Nintendo 64 controller that you can buy for Nintendo Switch Online members as something different. So when you are using this as just a standard Pro controller, this layout obviously doesn't match up. So it's more like A, B, X, and Y here. And I thought, oh, well, maybe that's kind of pointless if you were intending to use this with the expansion pack, because it wouldn't really match up. But I'm happy to report, well, somewhat happy to report that the expansion pack seems to do some interesting remapping of the controller and how you use the C buttons. So the way it works with the expansion pack, if you want to use the C buttons in their traditional layout, you have to hold the ZR button down and then press whichever button you desire, and it'll function as the standard C button. But if you don't have the ZR button pressed down, this just works as the standard A, B, X, Y layout. So yeah, overall, build quality feels really nice. It's really comfortable. The buttons feel pretty good. I do wish there was a little bit of a rocker with the D-pad. The actual button presses feel nice and responsive, but you can press the D-pad directly down from the center. It seems to completely lack a rocker. But if you are intending to use this primarily as a Nintendo 64 controller with the online expansion pack, there's not many games that really utilize the D-pad, so I don't know how much of an issue that is. I'm also not sure how much I love the design of the analog stick itself. It feels pretty good, but I don't know about this convex design that doesn't really have any grooves on the top. It does have a soft rubber cap, so the grip is pretty good, but ultimately I think I'd appreciate something that's ribbed, which both the Tribute 64 and the official Nintendo 64 Nintendo Switch Online option are. So keep that in mind as well. And then you've got your clear and turbo buttons here, which have kind of different functionality when being used with the Nintendo 64. And when you use this with the Switch, these just function as the plus and minus buttons. And there is another retro Nintendo 64 / PC Switch controller option from Retrobit with the Tribute 64. It's probably really easy to get all these little details confused. That has a slightly different design, one that kind of looks more like the old Hori gamepad from back in the day. And there are pros and cons to both models. Like I said, I find the Brawler64 to be very comfortable, much more comfortable in my opinion than the Tribute 64. However, I do feel like the buttons and the analog stick on the Tribute 64 feel a little bit better, and the Tribute 64 does have rumble functionality. So no rumble functionality with the Brawler 64. And I do think it's important to keep in mind that there is also rumble functionality included with the official Nintendo Switch Online Nintendo 64 controller. So if that's something you really enjoy, the Brawler 64 isn't going to have that. But you are saving $10 with the Brawler 64 because you can get this for $39.99, while the official option is $49.99, and the Tribute 64 is the exact same price as this too. So it's really going to be a tough call. It's ultimately going to depend on your personal preference. If overall comfort is more important to you, then I would definitely recommend the Brawler 64. But if rumble and maybe more faithful feeling buttons and sticks are more important to you, then I'd go with the Tribute 64. And I'll leave a link down in the description to my previous videos if you want to get into a little bit more detail of the specifics of both of those controllers. But I do want to say there is something I find disappointing about this USB Switch and PC version of the Brawler 64. So this version costs exactly the same as the Nintendo 64 version. Which I think is totally fair. There's not really any difference in functionality other than the dongle you're getting. But beyond that, there's nothing specialized about this specific model. And I do think, since some of Retro Fighter's other controllers, like their Duelist, the GameCube-themed Smash Bros. Controller, does feature rumble, I think they could have included rumble in this version. And I was able to test out whether or not this USB version would work with the Nintendo 64 dongle, and it does. So you can pair this USB version with any of those other Nintendo 64 dongles that Retro Fighters has made. So for me, picking up this version was kind of a benefit because now I can use those other colored versions that I was using with my Nintendo 64 with my Nintendo Switch. So that's kind of cool, but I do think ultimately it would be really nice if Retro Fighters just included both dongles in the package, so you could use it with both your Nintendo 64 and your Switch, since the controllers are exactly the same. And that's exactly what Retrobit did with their Tribute 64. When you buy that, you get both the USB dongle and the Nintendo 64 dongle, and you have rumble. So between the two options, it's definitely a tough call. I do think you're getting a little bit of a better value with the Tribute 64, but it's hard to deny the Brawler 64 being quite a bit more comfortable than that controller. So, you know, in my perfect world, I think I said this in my last video about the Brawler 64, I really wish I could kind of combine those two controllers, take the buttons and rumble functionality of the Tribute 64 and throw them in the body design of the Brawler 64. But one other thing I can definitely say is after trying the Nintendo Switch Online Nintendo 64 games with a Nintendo Switch Pro controller, it feels so much better to use this controller instead. The layout is just much more natural, and I actually appreciate this octagonal cutaway around the analog stick. It just feels more natural with Nintendo 64 games to kind of pin the stick in certain directions, and it just feels a little more floaty to me using the standard Switch Pro controller. So that's something to keep in mind. You're saving $10 here over going with the official option, and you're getting a arguably more comfortable and modernized layout by going with this, but it doesn't have rumble, and I really wish that, like I said, you got both dongles with this version instead of kind of splitting it into two and forcing you to either go with the Nintendo 64 option or the Switch option, or buying both so you can have that functionality. And I think that's gonna about do it. I'll leave links down in the description as always if you want to take a look at this for yourself. Let me know down in the comments if you're planning on picking up the Nintendo Switch Online expansion pass. I completely understand if you're not due to the price, But if you are, let me know what games you're most excited to play and which controller option you plan on going with. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a like on your way out and also consider subscribing. And until the next video, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.